Hello everyone. We are here to talk a little bit today about question 2, which is coming up on the ballot on November 8th. We're a contingent from the Revere Public Schools. We have Dr. Dianne Kelly, the Superintendent of Schools, Erik Fearing, the President of the Teachers Association, Dr. Paul Dakin, who was the former superintendent, now Superintendent Emeritus, and I am Carol Ty, currently serving on the school committee. There is a lot of confusion out there, even members of my own family asking me, how shall I vote on 2? And people require us to perhaps spread a little light on what is a very misleading and perhaps even false campaign out there. Now we hear about that the charter school folks are public schools. Maybe we should start by talking a little bit about that. Dr. Kelly, how public are the charter schools?
Sure. So charter schools are public schools. They're funded through public monies, including monies from cities and towns in which the schools are located and the cities and towns that send students to those particular charter schools. So in that sense, they are public schools, but they're certainly run very differently. I think the greatest distinction is that charter schools have no supervision by, say, a school committee or a city council or a town council that would oversee typically any kind of expenditures from the city coffers.
So they're public in that they get public money, but they're not responsible to any of the members of the public.
That's right.
Not to any of our public officials here in Revere, not to you as superintendent, not to the city council for a budget, not to taxpayers for the amount of money they get.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's correct. In fact, if you went onto the Department of Education website, you would see that every school and every school district in the Commonwealth has to provide their financial expenditures each year, which outlines how all of the money is spent. But if you look at any charter school, if you click on their finance page, it's blank.
Really?
There is no public reporting of the financial expenditures. So it's just a very different governance structure, and maybe Erik can talk a little bit about how that interacts with teachers.
Sure. The public schools are run by a school board, a school committee in Revere, and they work with the administration of the district, the superintendent, and are staffed by union teachers like those in the Revere Teachers Association.
So here, if they don't like what I do in the school committee, they cannot vote for me. Is there a process at all like that in the charter schools?
There is not. At the charter schools, there isn't a public board that runs it and needs to listen to voters. There's instead just a private board who typically hires a management company, and that's why you don't see any of the financial information out there and available, is because the whole expenditure goes to that management company, who then hire the employees who may not be licensed teachers and can keep a profit out of the public funds that were paid into that black box corporation.
Let me just, what Dianne said and what Erik said combine to an important fact. And the fact is, I don't consider them real public schools, charter schools,
I don't either.
in the traditional sense of
They're,
the word. But they get a public dollar. So they're getting public money. When we run the school department, if we don't spend all of our money, technically, in towns and cities across the state, that money goes back to the city or town.
Right.
In a charter school, and they try to do this, is not spend all their money. They do not have to send it back to the state. They do not have to send it back to the towns it came from. They can put it in a bottom drawer and let an endowment grow and grow. And there are charter schools in the area with millions of dollars of taxpayers' money in a bottom drawer that taxpayers have no control over how it's spent. That charter can spend it the way they want. If the school committee decided to spend money in a egregious way, the voter would pull them out. Or if the superintendent was spending money wildly, the school committee does a check on everybody on what I consider the real public side of the house. There is no check on the finances in these charter businesses, and that's what they are, big business.
Wow. So, what happens to our kids if they go to a charter school? I mean, originally charter schools were supposed to be so innovative, and they were supposed to share all kinds of programs and so forth. Now, we ourselves have very innovative programs, the very first innovation school in the state at the Paul Revere. We have expanded learning time schools. But what about a kid who wants something special? How would a kid get that at a charter school?
Well, frankly, the charter schools, which are about 23 years old now, over 23 years old, and they were started to be fonts of innovation, to bring ideas out and practice that would be good for public schools. They haven't delivered. The people that are still advocating for charter schools don't want to admit that the original premise over 20 years ago on why we started has been a failed experiment. And they haven't generated much innovation at all in the public schools. In Revere itself, with 3 schools that are expanded learning time and the first innovation school in the state, the Paul Revere, we have more in-district choice than most places do. And all of that came from what was happening in the education field, not what was seeded by a Massachusetts charter school idea.
In fact, a lot of the charter schools emulate the programs that we have at the Paul Revere, or the Garfield Middle, the Wayland Elementary, and the Hill Elementary, which are our 3 expanded learning time schools. And unlike the charters, which we're supposed to share with public schools, our schools have shared extensively, not only in Revere, but across the state. We've had over 80 teams from visiting districts come in and observe one of those 4 schools for the work that they're doing. And I feel like our public schools have been much more the model of innovation and sharing than any charter school has been.
And every one of those schools that has these special programs accepts all of the students in Revere. Anyone can come in, and if that's their neighborhood school, that's where they can go. I teach at the Seacoast School, which is an alternative program for students at risk of dropping out of high school. There are charter schools aimed at that same audience, and I routinely have students return to my classroom from a charter school because a couple of disciplinary infractions, and they'll be sent out. The charter schools, to some degree, can pick the students that go there instead of the students picking them.
Has that been our experience in the Revere Public Schools, that kids go and do not succeed there, so they're coming back to us?
Absolutely. We've had 4 kids return in the last couple of weeks from charter schools.
And had they just started in the beginning of the year?
Some of them had been there. One of them had just started this year. The other 3 had been at the charter school for over a year. But the parents reported the similar stories to what Erik said. There'd be a couple of minor infractions. They'd be called in each time, and eventually they'd be told that they might be better off going to the public schools. And the challenge with that is the money that was allocated from our budget for those kids that went to those charter schools will stay there. The state has recently changed how they do that funding so that there will be another check in February. It used to be that money would stay there for the year. So the idea is when the state does the enrollment check in February, by the time they process that paperwork around March or April, we should start seeing a return of a prorated portion of that student's financing. Honestly, it's too little too late when it comes in April, and that child's been here, for a couple of weeks now, since early October.
Yeah, we haven't had the resources then to give the kid what he or she needs. Yeah.
These are all reasons why our community has to vote no on 2.
Yes.
The no is the vote to give on question 2, because it preserves our city's money to go into our district schools and not monies to go out to these charter network big business operations.
Some people have asked me, well, does that mean we'll close down all the charter schools as they exist now?
No, and that's a great point that you bring up, because not only does a no on 2 preserve the existing charter schools, there are actually, in the way the laws are, the books are currently written, room for 40 more charter schools across the Commonwealth that haven't opened. So there really is no compelling reason for us to change the legislation around how many charter schools there can be. We're not at the limit already. The existing charter schools are not going to close. They're going to stay in place. All this does, a no vote on 2, is ensures that the Revere Public Schools themselves will not be straddled with the kind of underfunding that prohibits us from having art classes, music classes, all of that kind of thing. The $2 million that already is taken out of our budget to go to
Right.
charter schools has diminished our program significantly. We used to have a band at the high school. We no longer have the ability to have that. Lots of other different kinds of programming that we would love to have for our kids, dance, music, a lot of social emotional programs, and pieces to help kids that are struggling cope and function well in school and in life in general. Programs to help kids get into colleges earlier. These are all the kinds of things that we would be able to fund with that $2 million.
Right.
That's gone. What we want to do is ensure that even greater chunks of money aren't taken to these handfuls of kids. For us, it's about 250 kids from the city of Revere that currently attend charter schools. We want to make sure that larger chunks of money aren't taken to the detriment of the remaining 7,500 kids that sit before us every day.
Right. Right.
Talking about keeping the cap, it's worth noting that only Boston is actually at the limit on the number of charter schools, and there are plenty of empty seats in charter schools in Boston. They spend money advertising to draw more students into the charters so that they can make more money. Advertising for which school you're going to go to is not the way we should be spending public resources.
Absolutely no, not public, and it's just not good for education to be advertising that way too. One of the compelling ads, perhaps, is the mother who says, "Oh, my poor child, you know, is in a failing school," and so forth. So how do we address that? I mean, certainly none of them are from Revere, but how do we address that? That the mother says that my kid is not succeeding in the school and I want to go to a charter school.
Well, the more charters that come about, the more monies are drained from the schools. So it's a cycle of not having enough money because money's going out the door to these private enterprises and sitting in a bottom drawer instead of going to work in districts. Those schools get better if the monies are properly, to the proper amounts, are budgeted for school districts. And that occurs more if monies don't go out the door to charters. Then there are ways to make that child's program a lot stronger so that they are happier. When money goes out to the charters, most kids get hurt in the public system. It's not a fair way of doing things. It's big businesses' arm coming into the taxpayer and swiping their money away from them and putting it in a bottom drawer. And it shouldn't happen.
Well, amen. And to that, I understand that actually, Erik, you might have some insight into this, because I've heard from kids who came back who were looking for jobs in Revere, who had been teaching. One of them is my neighbor who had been teaching in a charter school, and she fears for her future.
Absolutely. I said before that charter school teachers don't necessarily have to have a teaching license. They also are hired at the whim of that private company that's operating the charter. So if they are too expensive, then they'll let them go. I've met teachers who have worked in charter schools for a few years, did very well, and then were just told they didn't have a job the next year because they cost too much. Sometimes they bring in veteran teachers for the first couple of years a charter is open, and then they start the turnover, where it's just very new people trying to maintain the program so that they can save money, which they can pocket.
You know, it's as a school leader, it's amazing to me that they can get away with that. And I think about the impact that has on those kids' lives when they've not benefited from the veteran teacher who has had 4, 5, 6, 7 years of experience to really understand what effective teaching looks like. You know, it's really...
You get the best education for students from veteran teachers in the classroom who have built up their profession and are comfortable staying there, are confident in what they're doing.
The new kids as they come along,
That's right.
too,
Absolutely.
the new teachers.
But hopefully this show helps people realize that they have to vote no on 2.
Yeah.
And we do have Representative Rosalie Vincent, who's strongly in the corner of a no on 2 vote, and our Senator Boncory, a new senator, who's also in the corner of a no on 2 vote. So we do have leaders, along with the mayor and the school committee.
The school
We
committee,
do have
yeah.
leaders in the community that understand this fiscal drain of our taxpayer money that goes off to these private enterprises that are starting to make education a business. Pretty soon, they might try it with the fire department and have local
to stop that?
private companies doing fires and taking the taxpayer's dollar. Who knows? It should be stopped.
Even though we think that's totally out of the question, we always thought it would be out of the question for education. The public schools are the ones who have made America what it is. They have made our democracy the most powerful one in the world, and we'd like to keep doing that.
And even, I'll add to what Paul said, even at the national level, our delegation in Washington, D.C., Catherine Clark and Elizabeth Warren have both come out publicly saying that they're against question 2. They're both going to be voting no. And Ed Markey's office tells me that there'll be an announcement soon, but his inclination leans toward no on question 2. So that'll be something to watch for in the coming days.
So our message to the community is that we all want to save our public schools. Vote no on question 2. Let's keep the public money in public schools. Vote no on question 2. Thank you very much.